Hello, ladies and gents and friends beyond the binary. It's me, ya boy, Tristan from Step Back History. How's everyone doing today? I can't hear you because I am not with you physically, so I'm assuming you're going to say that you are fan-dan-diddly-tastic. So, welcome to Step Back Today, which is a show I do on weekday or on Monday morning or Monday afternoons, I should say, where I talk about stuff at a time that is friendly to my people on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. So, the format of the show, by the way, if there's anybody who is in the chat that is new to the chat, if there's anyone who's new, please say hello. Please let yourself be known, because everyone is really welcoming here. Yeah, so here we go. I am me. I'm Tristan. I'm the host of Step Back History. I tend to sit here and answer some of y'all's questions that you have about history or the world or whatever you feel like a 30-year-old PhD dropout in history who runs a YouTube channel could possibly answer in a way that you would actually learn something. So we go with that. And usually I rant about capitalism and stuff. It's pretty fun. Yeah. So, unfortunately, Kelly was going to be here for the stream, but she got called into the office, so she's not here today, which means that my question collecting is not going to be perfect, and that's just a thing we'll have to live with, that I'm going to answer the questions I see, but if I miss them, sorry. I'll try my best, but I'd rather answer my questions without getting distracted with having to constantly stare at the chat. And I do see that it is stream regular comrade Jeb's birthday today. Well, happy 17th birthday. You've got 17th. 17 is such a fun year. And also I noticed that we have a new person, Veronica Reed from Kingston, Jamaica. Well, hello. I'm sure you're having a much better weather day than I'm having. It's kind of... well, actually, it's getting kind of sunny out now. But, yeah. So, wow, all the way from Jamaica. That's really awesome. Ooh, that's tasty. Okay. So since the last episode of Step Back Today, we've had the birth of a new video. I'm just going to minimize that thing so I don't keep looking at myself in the thing, because like a monkey in the mirror, I'm obsessed with staring at my own picture while I'm doing this stuff, because it gives me a face to look at. But now I can look at the cold black eye of this Logitech camera and have you think that I'm looking at you in a really kind of skeezy way. So, yes. So since the last episode of Step Back Today, I've released a Brazil video. When I was doing the stream on Monday and Tuesday, I was basically working late into the night both of those days, trying to get this video done, because with sponsors, you usually have hard deadlines when they want your video, and in that case, the hard deadline was Wednesday, just so that it could get finished for Monday. But then once they approved it, I could release it anytime I wanted, which was nice. So I finished that. It's done. It is completed. Sorry, the cats are acting really, really weird right now. They're just like running around the apartment. And yeah. So that's good. So the Brazil video came out to, I'm going to say, lukewarm response. It didn't do as well as, like, I'd been kind of on a hot streak lately with a few videos that had been topping the charts. This one was a solidly average history video, or step back video. It did all right. I think that compared to the average amount of views that it gets after after a few days, I'm about 3% above average, which is less than statistically significant. It's still well within the what's it called, the bell curve of how a video can perform. So it's just like a solid, not amazing, not terrible video release, which is fine. It's fine. You can't have every video be a winner. And already, if you look at the traffic of the Brazil video, it's already getting more traffic from search than from browse features, which is good. It means that the Brazil video is probably going to be very evergreen, which means it'll probably be raking up views for years to come. That's why I made the video, because brief history. Well, first of all, it's a sponsored video, so I wanted something that would have that kind of long-term success. But on top of that, I wanted the Brazil video to have, like, the videos that are like history of countries or religions. Those ones tend to have longer lives, and then, give it a couple years and it'll be one of the top videos by views. So that's good. What I did not expect, which I thought was very interesting, it was the Bolsonaro stands that came out of the woodwork, who really, really did not like that video because their fascist daddy made them upset. So that was fun. Yeah, and also talking about Glenn Greenwald has brought out some interesting folks. So, it's overall a very interesting response to the video overall. The next video I'm going to do is going to be about Shinto, the kind of religion of Japan. And that is... I'm doing some freelance work today, but it'll something that I will be doing in the future. But, yeah. Whew. So, yeah, that's the whole thing. So, yeah, Shinto's going to be the next one, part of my World Religion series, and then I don't know what I'm going to make after that. Every time I go to make a new video, I have to update a spreadsheet that I have of which videos have the best ratio of... It's a whole thing. I could go into it, but I don't know if you guys particularly care about how YouTube works. But basically, the consensus now is that videos should be all, like, you should be running series. And when you have a series, you can tell that a video is successful based on its ratio of suggested traffic to browse traffic. And a video that is getting a lot of suggested traffic is one that is bringing new people into the channel more for growing said YouTube channel. And so my plan is to, choose series based on weighting the ones that are performing the best on that that ratio, if you will. And we'll see what happens. Could be a pilot for a new series. It could be one of the older series. You never know. It's all sorts of fun stuff. Other things that have happened in the last week since this video, or since the last stream, was all the shit that went down this weekend about Jeffrey Epstein. Holy moly. So, cat is messing up my lighting because they all want to hang out between the curtain and the window. So, over the weekend, Jeffrey Epstein allegedly killed himself. So to kind of go on the bigger story of what's going on. So Jeffrey Epstein was now a finance billionaire who had garnered a reputation basically about the garnered a reputation for being a underage sex trafficker. he had been brought up on charges related to underage sex trafficking in, I want to say, 2005, and got away with it. Had his charges thrown out. But it has more to do with the fact that he was trafficking underage sex slaves for extremely powerful rich people. Now, the list of alleged people who were on his Lolita Express airplanes and private islands and stuff like that is almost entirety the who's who of the American and like British elite, if you will. It ranges from Bill Clinton to Donald Trump to Prince Andrew to Steven Pinker. Just like tons and tons of extremely important people have been associated with Jeffrey Epstein. And the thing that makes this complicated is it's hard to tell that because this is like a very powerful billionaire broker and a child sex ring runner, and discerning who was who knew about what and who was involved in what is gonna probably, for like a decades long operation, is gonna be long and complex. And then Jeffrey Epstein up and dies in prison. There was a previous attack on him and he was hospitalized like a week ago. And I don't remember the details. I think there was like debate over whether this was a suicide attempt or whether he was assaulted in prison. And I think that that is certainly suspicious. And when I woke up on Saturday morning and found out that Jeffrey Epstein had, quote, killed himself, like everybody, like the immediate reaction from like most people was like, ooh, like, are you sure? Because this is a guy who had dirt on potentially a lot of extremely important, very wealthy people, who was just starting to spill the beans. And then just all of a sudden dies, feels fairly, I will not say what happened. I think that given all the circumstances and stuff that's going on, that there's a lot to be suspicious about, and that doubting, like, okay, so first of all, cornered pedophiles do commit suicide in fairly high numbers. That's not unheard of. Why he did it that day is a matter for, different types of discussion. But let's just say if it turned out he was assassinated and if it turned out he committed suicide, both would not surprise me. He had a lot of very powerful people who were probably very, very grateful that he died one way or another. And now that he's dead, he's not going to be able to do his own part in all of that stuff. He's not going to be able to spill the beans. Which means that now the investigation into the sex ring is going to have a lot less energy behind it. And the investigation's probably going to have lost a key, like the center of the ring. So it's going to be a lot harder. And a lot of people who might not have gotten away with it are now probably going to get away with it. Which is messed up. So we'll see. We'll see where that all goes. But I'm not going hardcore conspiracy theory. And I'm also not going full dismissive of the conspiracy theory. Like, this is one of those situations where there's so many people who would benefit from him dying that it's actually it's suspicious in and of itself. So that's my statement on that. but I'm not unless something new starts to come to the surface. I'm not going to be surprised by it. And also, I wouldn't be surprised if Epstein was murdered and that it wasn't a high-profile assassination. Another thing that we don't talk about that much is that pedophiles also tend to get murdered in prison. And prison guards aren't exactly known for being great at protecting prisoners. So it could be that, guards looked the other way while he got killed by a fellow inmate. Similar stuff happened to, like, that's how Jeffrey Dahmer died. Jeffrey Dahmer died in prison. He was killed by another prisoner. So I would say that this is going to be tough to unravel, I should say. And there's, like I said, there's motive out the wazoo. The thing is opportunity and such. Motive, opportunity. What's the third one? A weapon. There's an investigation going down. It's run by the FBI, which is now run by a Trump sycophant. So I don't imagine that. I don't have much hopes for that churning up anything. If it is high profile, there could be a Fall Guy situation. This is going to be one of those things where we're probably never going to know what really happened, and people are going to have conspiracy theories about it for years and years and years and years and years. So there you go. Another thing, and I would love to collect this in the chat. I thought Kelly would be here to collect these. But I think I'll just read the chat after the stream is done. But one of the things I did in the last week was I asked Twitter to name two things. One thing you liked about Step Back, the YouTube channel, and one thing you'd like to see different, so that I could build sort of a constructive idea about what's working and not working for the channel. And I didn't get a whole lot of response on Twitter, but I thought I'd put it out there for you guys in the chat. If you guys are in the Discord, I would love if you posted it in the Discord instead, in the Step Back video discussion channel, just so that I can collect these. But I'll try to read as many as I can after the stream is over, if the chat lets me do that, which I think it does. So that's something that I would appreciate. I'm trying to do some market research. I'm trying to get Step Back to... Step Back's had sort of a slow, anemic growth for the last couple years. And I'm trying to find ways to kickstart that, and finding out what's working for the channel and what's not working for the channel would be very important. The other thing that happened this week, which might be one of the most good and also cursed events of the 2016 presidential election, which I'll probably talk about on like tomorrow's stream as well, which was that Bernie Sanders was a guest on the Joe Rogan Experience, which, for those who don't know, Joe Rogan is like the #1 podcast for dumb guys. It's like the ultimate dumb guy podcast. And he tends to have a lot of libertarians and right-wing people come on for interviews. And because he is because he's like not a good interviewer, he's like a Steven Crowder type situation where he just uncritically sort of goes along with whatever the people are doing, including if they have horrible things to say. So Bernie Sanders went on Joe Rogan, which was super, super, super cursed. When I saw that, I was just like, this is the most cursed thing I've ever seen. But I have heard, now this can't be verified with numbers, unfortunately, yet. But the thing is, like, Sanders' stream resulted in a lot of comments showing up under the YouTube video of the podcast with conservatives, right-wing people declaring that they really, really liked the interview and that they have that he's changed their positions on some stuff. So he was talking to a really a receptive audience that doesn't normally get his message, because his message is usually filtered through things. And apparently he was given a lot of time to let his ideas breathe, which led to a lot of people finding him way more compelling. So the Joe Rogan sort of dumb guy audience loved his stuff. And I've been hearing more and more stuff about how the Joe Rogan interview has exposed him to a very receptive audience that is very interested in him, which I think is really good. I'm not sure how that will translate to numbers specifically, especially because the primaries and the caucuses especially are a time where it's more about courting registered Democrats and getting people to register. And turning somebody who doesn't like Bernie Sanders into someone who likes Bernie Sanders is a good thing. But converting somebody from a person who likes Bernie Sanders to someone who's willing to volunteer and register as a Democrat to vote in the primaries and caucuses, that's huge. That I don't know if that's happened yet, but we'll see. Where does this info come from? This is very, I say that this is like very hearsay allegorical, audience, or, this is very allegorical because it's basically just looking over the comments on the YouTube video for the Joe Rogan interview. Joe Rogan probably has literally the most broadly ranged audience on the internet. Maybe so. I always thought that that Joe Rogan was like the epitome of like that he was kind of like a watered down version of like Steve Crowder and like Ben Shapiro and stuff like that. Like not Ben Shapiro, but Steven Crowder, in that like he's one of those guys who's like, oh no, I don't have strong political opinions. I just always seem to have hard right wing guests and I never question them hard on anything. I thought that was Joe Rogan, but I'm hearing different. So I guess he's a libertarian or something. I have no idea. That's good, Tim Hortons. And the last thing I want to talk about actually is this Quillette troll that I think is really great. So if you guys haven't heard of Quillette, it's basically it's a news website that I say news in like the most elusive term, where the what should I say? Oh, there's a cat. Okay. Stream has changed. Now I'm gonna have to adjust the microphone or the camera for maximum cat viewage. Since I know that's what you guys want. Yeah, so Quillette, the intellectual dark web, far-right news website that Quillette has like a huge bugbear against Antifa, has literally helped Nazis out Antifa like protesters and activists, literally putting their life in danger. They're the ones who spread the conspiracy theory about quick dry cement hiding in the milkshakes and like all that kind of bullshit. Anyways, to show how shitty their journalistic integrity is, somebody did an interview with them saying that they were in the DSA meetings, and the DSA and like said a bunch of like really disparaging stuff about a lot of disparaging stuff about the DSA that wasn't true, like a bunch of like lies. And Quillette didn't verify anything, including his identity, which was also fake. And they just published everything. And then like the very next day, the person who gave them all the fake information then went to like another journalist at like Jacobin or something like that, or I can't remember the website anymore. It's like Motherboard Jacobin something, and basically just told them everything about how they trolled Quillette. And Quillette got in shit, and I think that was hilarious, because it shows that these far-right quote unquote news websites are complete propaganda mills that don't actually care about journalism, which I think is interesting. So, someone said pet the dang cat. I am petting the cat. Hey, Foobs. Might be able to hear her purr. Maybe not. She purrs very quietly. She's this cat, Phoebe, this is Phoebe. She is an extraordinarily quiet cat. Like, she purrs. She's purring right now, but it's always super, super, super quiet. And she never meows, or she very rarely meows. When she meows, you actually like will do like a jump because you're like, I forgot that you make noise. And yeah, I think that she's wonderful. She's like one of the most well-behaved cats I've ever owned, and I've owned a lot of cats. That makes me sound crazy. There's just always been 1 to 2 cats, or at least at one point there was 3 cats. My family growing up always had between 1 and 3 cats in the house. Most of the time, 1 or 2. There was like a 3-year period where we had 3, but that didn't last super long. So I know a lot about the personalities of cats, and I have never had a cat that is this chill and this well behaved. And so now Romeo, on the other hand, is very much Romeo is very much the opposite. He is a very loud cat. He reminds me a lot of a cat I had when I was a kid named Dragonair, who was part Siamese, and he was extremely loud and meowed all the time. Hey, C.R. Smith, thank you for the $5.55 super chat. You are that $5.55 is literally putting food in this cat's belly. So thank you very much. That I rely on people like you to keep this business afloat, so I can keep making videos and I can pay bills and all those things that I need to do. So I appreciate it. You do have a question. What was the international reaction to the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire by Emperor Napoleon? Also, why did you do that instead of working with it? I'm not super well versed on European history, but from what I know, what can I say about that? So he thought that, so like, when you have to remember the whole thing about Napoleon being a representation of, oh, there she goes, of Napoleon being the end of the French Revolution. on that note, the French, he thought he was a modernizing, free person who was making countries better and more liberal and free by conquering them. So, from what I recall, the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire was because Napoleon deemed that the HRE was an anachronism. And I do think that when people talk about Germany, when people talked about Germany at that time, they saw it as this antiquated, old system that even many people in the HRE didn't pay much attention to anymore. Like, I think that the HRE, by the time it collapsed, had, like, it existed, but very few actual Germans really put much weight into it. And I don't think that that it had that much power. And so, like, that part, I think, is what many people thought. Like, when the Holy Roman Empire was officially dissolved, I think that many people were under the impression, they're like, oh, okay, I guess. Like, I imagine that they were like, well, that was a thing that was inevitably going to happen. They were kind of on the down. They were kind of falling apart anyway. That's my thought. I don't know. I'm not very well versed in 19th century European history. But those are the few things that I know. And as for installing relatives as monarchs, I never said that Napoleon was right or that he made sense, but that was a thing that he thought he was doing. A lot of the countries that he invaded and conquered and put his relatives in power in ended up doing stuff like adopting the metric system, and they added all sorts of stuff for, like, religious controls and all sorts of, like, French Revolution-y type stuff. So it's not, like, I'm not saying that he was right. I'm just saying that, you know, it was an idea. It was a thing that he wanted, that he was trying to do. Including, there was a project where the French Revolution was trying to put in a different calendar that was like 10 months. There'd be 10 months of the year, and all of them had non religious names, and they all had a certain amount of days, and the years started counting up from the French Revolution. And it was like an attempt to completely remove religion from the equation. And so I just took it to go, like, you know, oh man. And there was even one, this never went anywhere, but there was an attempt to make a French Republican clock, which was going to undo the way that time worked. Like, they don't talk about it super often, but the idea was that I think, like, a day would have 10 hours in it. And those hours would be made up of, like, 10 minutes, and those minutes would be made up, like, all the things had been really decimalized in a really funny way. So, like, there's some weird stuff from the French Revolution that, like, is completely really weird. Okay. Should news be willing to openly call Trump racist, or should they just let people decide for themselves? Apparently, the management at NPR have been having internal debates about this recently. I think that they should definitely be well, okay. So, Trump does and says racist things all the time. And so there's, like, two angles you can go down. So one, I bet NPR thinks that that there's two angles to go down, which is they don't want to be accused of being biased towards him just because he's a Republican president, which like is a bad argument in my mind, because this is NPR we're talking about. Like, American conservatives are never going to be like, you know what, I've changed my mind about NPR, they're okay now. They're going to call NPR a radical socialist institution no matter what. Should they openly call Trump racist? Well, like, the other angle you could go down is how people react when somebody tries to tell them a subjective category. Well, not subjective. Okay, well, we can go there. Like, and so many people might react poorly if that's the case. But in my mind, Trump is racist. The shit he says all the time makes an extremely clear case that he is racist. And I imagine that NPR wastes no time drawing attention to those things. The thing, though, about NPR is that NPR is news. NPR has, like, it has so many different programs and things like that, like, should they call Trump racist on their 60-minute news, like, daily news program? Probably not. Can they call him racist on, like, one of their many, many other podcasts that are about politics? Sure. I don't think that it should undermine your journalism to point out that Trump is showing a lot of the signs of being exactly that kind of thing. But the problem is where you draw the lines on that, because, you know, you do enough research, you'll realize that most American politicians are racist, and the United States itself is a racist institution built upon a racist economy that has most of its primitive accumulation made through racism, that exudes racist imperialism across the globe, that uses race as a fundamental category of social categorization, that systematically creates a racist class structure in America. And to just call the president racist and then think that you've stopped there feels incomplete. And I would almost rather that NPR just avoid discerning who is not or not racist than, like, you know, just going down the whole thing. I don't know. NPR also relies on public. I don't know where to go with NPR from that point, but NPR has a lot to deal with. So I could understand why NPR is having debates over whether to openly call Trump racist. Just don't know where to go from there. I would imagine that the fact that they're having a debate is healthy. And it kind of comes to, like, the core of, like, what journalism is going to be in the next couple years, if that makes sense. Oh boy. Oh, I'm gonna come for you, nationalist patriot. You could not be more wrong. But let's get to some other stuff. What role does alienation in capitalist consumer culture play a role in radicalizing young American mass shooters? Sure. I think that... Okay. I do think that alienation so for those who aren't like familiar with or who have heard the term but don't know what it means, one of the things that's called so a Marxist. A Marxist believes that the value that one should receive, or the value that an object that you make has, is related to how much time you have put into making said object, the amount of labor time. And that under capitalism, the fruits of your labor, by and large, are taken from you and given to your boss. And that can have, as you feel like you're doing more and more work and not getting rewarded for it, that you can basically be you can have this feeling of detachment and this loss of feeling that makes you feel disconnected, makes you feel depressed, and those kinds of things, as you feel alienated from your labor. So capitalist alienation gives you a strong sense that nothing you do matters, that you feel like you're losing more and more power in the world. And there's several ways you can break down the young American mass shooter, because the young American mass shooter is almost exclusively white, almost exclusively male. I just say almost exclusively because I can think of a couple cases that are exceptions, but they are definitely exceptions and rather than the rule. Very often, especially when capitalism is starting to go through the crisis it is now, you find many people who are suffering huge under the system. And in these crises of capitalism, people try to find different angles, different approaches to explain why they feel so disconnected, why they feel this alienation. And in the United States, where there's no real socialist current that is mainstream, the options are to go down looking at different systems of oppression. And then there's scapegoating. And I think that in the case of these mass shooters, they're trying to exercise some sort of power to make some sort of stance that they feel like they've had their power taken away from them. And usually the reason that they use is that they've been scapegoating, because a lot of white men have been responding well to scapegoating immigrants, to scapegoating Muslims, to scapegoating just women. And they've seen that people of color and women specifically have had some small changes on the margins, some superficial gains. You know, they got the Marvel movie, and now Mortal Kombat doesn't show cleavage. So, like, that doesn't affect the day-to-day experiences of women in a huge way. It is inspirational. It's not nothing, but it's not a whole lot either. And that is, in this situation, men who, or, you know, like white guys who in more recent days have become less and less social, who have been spending more and more of their social interactions in places like Discord, in places like 8chan, have had their brains just melted by the rapidly accelerating toxic rhetoric that they're open to because they're trying to explain why everything sucks. Then they commit racism, or then they commit, they glob on and double down on the racism and sexism in society and commit acts of horrific mass violence as a result. So, yes, I would say that definitely capitalist consumer culture and alienation play a role in the radicalizing of young men into the far right and then becoming mass shooters. But I don't think it's the only answer. And to say that it's the only answer would be to be too reductionist, in my opinion. All right. Next question is, so Jeffrey Epstein was murdered to shut him up. I think I thoroughly answered that question when I talked about Epstein. I think that it would not surprise me if someone did that. It also would not surprise me if someone didn't do that. We honestly don't know enough at this point. And I hope to consider myself a YouTuber who is confident enough to not be able to answer a question or not be able to answer that question and realize that we'll probably, if we ever find out the truth, it won't be, we don't know right now. And that making any foregone conclusions at the moment is irresponsible. Okay. So was it Clinton or Trump who organized the assassinations? Feel like saying that the Clintons could have done this is a little rich. I don't know if the Clintons have... I mean, like, it's not impossible, but, like, it's counter to a lot of what is established, known about them and the things that they have contacts with. I mean, I think they have they have hundreds of millions of dollars, so they obviously could have done it, but still, I think that would be tough. That'd be a tough sell to say that that's a thing. I don't know. He was a CIA asset. There was some talk about that, which gives a lot of credence that the CIA probably did it, but if anyone did it at all. So, like, again, we don't know. Things are very fluid at the moment. It only happened like 2 days ago. What if Bernie flips a solid South? I think he has the ability to. I think that the coalition that he could build in the South would upend the Southern strategy kind of way that people have been talking now. When people realize that, class exists, that new alliances, like alliances that people thought had been broken because of the Southern strategy, could be reforged in interesting ways. Okay. Do you think Trump should declare the KKK and neo-Nazi groups as terrorists? Yes. 160,000%. I thought the KKK already was considered a terrorist group, but I did. Josh, I find it odd that you're saying this the day after it came out that Trump's government literally tried to suppress a report from the FBI showing that, white nationalist, right-wing nationalist #patriots committed 100% of terrorism in the United States in 2018, and that the government tried to suppress that. That's huge. To not, the CIA has been saying for decades that right-wing white nationalist terrorism is the number one threat to the United States. It has been since the 90s. I think basically ever since, I can't even think of a time in American history where right-wing white nationalism wasn't the single most big terrorist problem in America. I don't think there was another period. There there's a period where the FBI maybe thought that the Black Panthers were a bigger threat, but like that's bullshit. So in my mind, when 100% of terrorist attacks are done by white nationalists, you definitely should be considering the KKK and neo-Nazis as terrorists. It's just that, aren't cats solitary animals? Yeah, they can be. They go back and forth. Cats are fickle creatures. Definitely, if you are to have more than one cat, you should probably keep them in a larger space than we have. But yeah, cats are territorial, but they also can be social. It's not a mutually exclusive category. They very much need their own space, but they aren't like, they're not solitary like, say, trying to think of animals that are like this in the wild, where like if they caught another one of their own species, they would basically kill them on sight. That like cats do spend time together. It's just that they need to not feel threatened, basically. Yeah, when was white nationalism not a threat? Maybe before 1492. That's a pretty good answer. Okay. Yesterday my mother said Corbyn should be working with the Tories to create a bipartisan plan for Brexit instead of continually calling for a general election. What's a good response to that? That no Brexit headed by fucking Boris Johnson is going to result in anything but disaster. Like, what could Labour possibly push? What could Labour possibly say to the Conservatives right now that would make an actual plan for Brexit? Like, in my mind, the quote-unquote plan for Brexit is like, what is the safest way to jump off this cliff without a parachute? There's like, yeah, you could definitely like wrap yourself in lots of foam and lots of styrofoam and cloth and stuff like that. But like, I would think, and this is my issue with Jeremy Corbyn too, is that what they should be doing with all due effort is to stop Brexit from happening. Brexit was this like death suicide pact that they made. I think that that's like Corbyn. Like, I don't know. I don't see there's this fantasy that somehow there's going to be some sort of good way out of, there's going to be some positive outcome of Brexit that's not going to be the destruction of the fucking country. So I don't know what actually would come out of a bipartisan plan. Yeah. I don't know what. I hope that if a general election happens, I think that right now the fact that they need a general election makes sense, because to make one of the biggest disasters in British history be headed by somebody who wasn't elected is terrible. It's terrible. And I know that the only reason why Boris Johnson might hold out is because Boris Johnson knows that Jeremy Corbyn is going to be prime minister in the next election, and it's just a matter of time. And so I would say that, yeah, I think that honestly the only thing that Corbyn could do to save everything is is just get elected so that they can stop Brexit. I know that's not what Corbyn said he would do, but man, it'd be nice. Okay. Did Epstein get whacked? We don't know. Is Nestor back now? Bay or nay? I think he's more bay than nay. I would probably say Nestor Makhno definitely lived in a real brutal time for his country's history, and being super nasty to and like, you know, had to do some pretty horrible things. But also that was kind of the context of the Russian Civil War, so take that as it is. But I think Nestor Makhno is a more positive than negative figure, that's for sure. And we get so few anarchist icons that I don't want to take them away. Examples of racism in the U.S. has enforced on the world. The U.S. isn't built on racism. It's a negative aspect of the nation. Okay, let's get started. Okay. How example of racism the United States has enforced on the world? How should we start? Okay. Let's start with the founding of the United States. Let's go with that. Let's just go from there, and we'll move forward. In 1776, the United States declared independence from Britain. Okay, fine, whatever. In doing so, they did start the War of Independence under the idea that they were angry about something called the Quebec Act. One of the things about the Quebec Act that they didn't like, two things actually. One was that part of the Quebec Act was about integrating the French province of Quebec into the British imperial system in North America. They really didn't like that the French were not English and that they were worshippers of Catholicism. They also really didn't like that they were not able to expand into Ohio and that general region in order to displace and murder the indigenous people who lived there in order to build land on their territory. Not to mention the fact that the 13 colonies already existed on territory that had belonged to indigenous people that had been literally committed genocide to erase them from the map and to take them over. Next. Moving forward, U.S. signs the Constitution, the glorious Constitution that Americans worship like it's some kind of fucking holy writ, like the next section of the Bible, literally declares enslaved people in the South 3/5 of a human being for the sake of drawing districts, not to mention taking away the rights of the right to vote from women, from people of color, and most definitely people who were too poor to own land of their own. Expanding on that, we moved into the 19th century, in which the United States went to war several times for imperial conquest, including the Mexican-American War. They had the Louisiana Purchase, in which they took a whole bunch of territory from the French that belonged to indigenous people, that still had indigenous people living there, moved people out, committed massive amounts of genocide to push people out, and had an entire crisis over the fact that they wanted to expand slavery into these new territories. They literally went to a civil war to start slavery, or to preserve slavery. After defeating it and ending slavery, you still had what are called black codes in the South, or Jim Crow laws after that kept a level of racial hierarchy for decades. And I think we're getting into a few things. Yeah, there was, as Comrade Jeb points out, there was an invasion of the Philippines in which there was a genocide committed against the Filipino people, especially the Muslims living there. There was... Oh, gosh. You are banned. So let's what else could we oh gosh, there's got distracted. Like, the United States over its time, the United States, over its history, has facilitated undemocratic coups of democratically elected leaders across the world, but especially in Latin America. So, and this is not a thing that they would do in white countries. The thing they would do in Latin America and in places like the Middle East and in Iran and stuff. Basically, in many of these countries, especially in the South American countries, the coups that they put in place were about preserving white supremacy in these regions. If you don't think that part of the coup that they led in places like friggin' Honduras, Nicaragua, fucking Chile, fucking Argentina weren't about preserving white supremacy in those countries and imperialist things abroad, that speaks quite a bit to racism imposed on other countries, if you will. Not to mention, someone point out Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was an extremely racist president who believed that countries run by non-white people basically had no self-autonomy. So he used the United States military to invade several countries, completely violating their international sovereignty because he just felt like they weren't white enough to establish their own leadership. So under Woodrow Wilson's presidency, the United States invaded the Dominican Republic, Haiti several times, Mexico several times, including the example of Pancho Villa, who was a criminal who the U.S. invaded Mexico to hunt down. They also just didn't like the leader of Mexico at one point, so the United States just took over the city of Veracruz and held it hostage until the Mexicans elected a different president. Where else could we go with this? Oh my God. Let's count the ways. The United States has race and racism and imperialism as the core at the center of the country. How long will this stream last? It goes until 2, so we have another little less than an hour. The U.S. needs to secure its interests? No, it does not! The U.S. has no right to invade other people's sovereign territory for its own goddamn interests. You see, that's the dumb imperialist thinking that, leads to all of the violence and destruction in the world. Come on! That's one of the dumbest arguments I've ever heard. Because, what the fuck does interests even mean? This is... okay, I feel like I'm bullying you because I have the stream and you are just a guy in the chat. But, to deny that racism and genocide are not only at the core of the United States, and I would argue all settler colonial states, but that the United States is, right now, a global empire that literally uses the most expensive military on the planet to force other countries to give up their sovereignty, to hand over resources and enrich the United States. And if you think that that is justified, then you can get the fuck out of this. You can get the fuck out of this this stream, because you are in the wrong place, buddy. If you think that it's okay for the U.S. to maintain a global empire, to maintain this stuff, not to mention in the name of geopolitical interest, supporting a white supremacist state in Israel, which they still do to this day, including an illegal occupation of Palestinian people and a slow, systematic genocide of the indigenous people of Palestine, or, going to a less controversial example, supporting the white supremacist minority rule government in South Africa for decades in order to stop black government over their own country. And of course, not invading every brown country that won't bend the knee, that has petrol. Like, ugh. Or how about, like, oh man, the debt peonage that happened in Ecuador, where Ecuador ended up in shit tons of debt that they can never pay off. And in order to pay them off, the United States, the IMF and the World Bank, but primarily headed by the United States, pushed the Ecuadorian government to give all of its oil assets over to American companies. Like, yeah, jeez, like, or even shit, they tried a short plan where they were just going to kick all the black people out of America and send them to Liberia. Like, shit. There's no stop to how many things the United States has done over the years to maintain a system of imperialism and white supremacy, and have been completely fine with genocide in order to keep up that system. And no matter what quote-unquote interests you have in those regions, it does not ever, 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 ever justify genocide. So I'm going to put this here. I'm just going to say this to you. I'm going to say this to everybody. Everybody, you can quote this. You can quote this forever. There's never a good reason to support white supremacy or genocide, even if it means that your corporations might make a few more millions of dollars. It's not worth it, because genocide's bad. All right. There we go. I know this is what people want to see. Oh, and now the argument is we should keep NATO and bully other countries, because if we don't stop bullying countries, then other countries will bully them. That logic. Solid. Okay. I need to get off of this for a while, because that made me mad, and I don't like being mad. Being mad is unhealthy. Okay. Let's see what the next question is. How can American Bernie Sanders supporters debunk the notion that Biden is more electable than Bernie? I do think that you can definitely say that Joe Biden is doing it himself. Joe Biden, who has got, like, in the last, like, week, said that, all right, let me just put this all together. He said that poor kids can grow up to be just as successful as white kids. At the last debate, he asked people to go to a non-existent website called Go to Joe 30330. He's just like, he has claimed that he was president during a mass shooting that occurred, or he was vice president during a mass shooting that occurred in 2018. Like, he's kind of just like showing that his brain is goddamn scrambled eggs. So that's a thing. Gosh. So Biden's already doing it himself, and you can just point out that the guy, and also creepy handsy guy, like the fact that he's so creepy with women, like all those things should make him much less electable. But I know that most people who try to push on the electability argument don't particularly care about the fact that he's a sexist creep. So let's just focus on the notion that Biden seems to just be completely mentally incompetent. And Sanders is the more electable option, because if you look at the amount of supporters he has, specifically the fact that he has more donors than every other leader in the Democratic Party, shows that he has a massive volunteer base and a very strong ground game that will be very, very useful for getting elected. And the thing is, like, electable is usually just a dodge word to say that they want a right-wing candidate, and they don't want to say that they want a right-wing candidate, so they defend themselves with this electability argument. So normally it's in bad faith. But if they honestly are worried about electability, you can talk to them about how elections are about organization. So you need to have ideas that inspire people, which, Joe Biden goes along basically saying all the things that America can't do. But you need to have a strong base of things that you want to happen. And then on top of that, you need to have a big volunteer base that are going to get out the vote, that are going to primary, that are going to caucus, that are going to drive people to the polls, that are going to help people register. And if the recent New York Times piece that shows that Bernie Sanders has like almost double the amount of donors as his second highest person, which, by the way, has most definitely gone up since the debate because he's pulled in some insanely high donation numbers since the last debate. If I remember correctly, the most amount of donors for Sanders has something like 700,000 donors. And the number 2 is Elizabeth Warren, whom, if she gets out of the race, a lot of them will become Sanders supporters. She has something like 400,000 donors. So think about how big that difference is. And show that, like, that means that enthusiasm is on Sanders' side, that the volunteer base is on Sanders' side, and that really choosing anybody else is giving up all of that energy for the sake of a candidate that literally no one's excited about. So that's the thing. Okay. The other day you said neoliberal economics is a system justifying belief. Would you say the same thing is true of retributive justice? Yes. It's the way things are. The thing about retributive justice is that I don't know if it's a system justifying belief, because retributive justice is not really based on any sort of actual belief structure. It's just the way things are, and based on emotional arguments of revenge, basically. So that's a thing. Honestly, if you put any actual intellectual thought into justice systems, you'll start to trend towards a restorative justice model anyway. So in my mind, a lot of times retributive justice is not so much a system justifying belief as it is a just lack of thinking about justice as a concept. Okay. Did the way the U.S. government approached countering reactionary Islamic terrorism had a positive effect on the U.S.? Should the same policy be used on America's white supremacists? Counterterrorism in the United States was always kind of bad. The counterterrorism measures used against Muslims in the United States ended up with a lot of FBI agents spying on Muslim students associations on their like freaking rafting trip to upstate New York. and harassing Islamic communities and more or less basically brutalizing Islamic communities in the United States. And I would say that it was not super effective. The effective way to counter terrorism is to... Oh man, now I'm becoming a terrorism person. To counter terrorism, you need to fix the geopolitical issues that have caused terrorism. The thing is, Islamic fundamentalist terrorism was never actually that big of a deal in the United States. Never has been. The Al-Qaeda cell that worked in the United States that did 9/11 is very small. And finding the terrorists who did such things or who are funneling money to such things would be very much like a criminal investigation. While dealing with white supremacy and dealing with white supremacist terrorism will be more of an act of, first of all, trying to address the geopolitical issues at the root of it, which is dealing with the crisis of capitalism and racism and all those kinds of things. But on top of that, you're going to have to go through active de-radicalization and deplatforming things, which means that some of the things you're going to have to do to stop the radicalization of white supremacists is going to be shutting down sites like 8chan that are going to be like finding like lists of prominent white supremacists and keeping them from having a platform. Those kinds of things. Yeah. So that's more or less like the way to handle that. Islamic terrorism is the way to address Islamic terrorism would be to fix the geopolitical situation in the Middle East, and on top of that, trying to counter the power of moneyed people who were propping it up. So the real way to have it's like they take different strategies, because white supremacist terrorism is about the radicalizing of white men through stochastic stuff. It's all about like white supremacist terrorists don't meet up at white supremacist meetings. They hang out on 8chan and on Discord servers, which means that you've got to intercept those, but also keep the turn down the temperature that leads to the stochastic terrorist events, like, you know, trying to get hate speech out of public media, trying to stop like white supremacist intellectuals from having a platform, getting them off of those things, getting that rhetoric out of the public sphere, and also funding counter speech efforts and putting efforts into pushing away from white supremacist narratives, as well as changes in policies to get people away from white supremacy. While dealing with Islamic terrorism was more about stopping networks of gray money from the oil trade, the gray market oil trade, and from wealthy oil barons in Saudi Arabia and such from funneling money into these organizations so that they could maintain their structure and commit the acts that they were doing. That was the main way to handle Islamic terrorism, and they did work on that a little bit, but harassing Muslims, individual Muslims in the United States was not an effective measure. That was a xenophobic, anti-immigrant reaction, while dealing with white supremacists is going to be less of a... Dealing with white supremacy is going to be more of a widespread, introspective fight, which will be difficult. All right. My neighbor has a big TV I like. It's in my geopolitical interest to take it. Yeah. All right. What if the Electoral College was changed so that a guaranteed minority population ethnic groups had adequate representation, i.e., rather than minority population states? I think that the general idea of having an electoral college is undemocratic and should be scrapped. I do think I don't think that there's much reforming of that. Why don't the Democrats embrace BDS? A peaceful boycott of a country occupying another as an alternative against militant opposition. That's good. Even Bernie is against it. The reason why, Gad, is because the role that Israel plays in American politics is currently in flux. And in the past, it was extremely bipartisan to support Israel's interests wherever you went. Which means that there are very powerful groups, like what's it called, like AIPAC, that can funnel lots of money into campaigns. And there was a time in American culture where even getting a whiff of being against Israel could destroy a political career. And that means that it was definitely a subject that you had to support unconditionally and not even talk about. And in my mind, I think that a lot of older American politicians are against BDS because of that lingering legacy. While, like, if you've noticed that younger politicians, who more understand that that opposition to what Israel is doing in Palestine is not as pearl clutching as it used to be. And so you end up with people like Ilhan Omar who support BDS. And I think that as you get more why do Democrats care? Because because it's what's it called? It's money. I still think that I think I just talked about it. I think I might be just dealing with chat lag here. But yeah, that is why older politicians still come from a time when Israel had, and the interests of Israel had complete domination over both parties in the political system. It's actually fairly recent. It's more of a Netanyahu era. It's more of a Netanyahu era type change to align the interests of Israel with America's political right and with Republicans. That is a recent change that a lot of older politicians haven't got on board with yet. And a lot of older politicians think that they want to get back into that model. And they want to get back into the good graces of the Israeli state. While, younger politicians would be about, let's not, cozy up to this white supremacist state that is attacking Palestinian people in their indigenous territory. So there's that. Tristan Luckley said South Korea was invaded in the north, even though if you read anything in the Korean War, North Korea invaded South Korea first. Okay, I don't think I know. Oh boy, you're going with that argument, huh? Okay, let me just get it's great. Let me just find that. I'm just going to get a comic out that kind of speaks to that argument that you just made there. Nationalist hashtag patriot. just cooking up right here. Just put this on for a little bit. Apple AirPods cost $159, but they can't pay taxes for decent wages or their Chinese factory workers. Post. You said that on an iPhone. Hack, gotcha. Cops should have seatbelts. Or cars should have seatbelts. Yet you bought one, hypocrite. Oh, much owned. We should improve society somewhat. Yet you participate in society. Curious. I am very intelligent. Oh, man. Love that comic. Always comes up every time someone tries to pull that kind of like, oh, you did a thing on a thing. How could, oh gosh, God, such a bad argument. Holy crap. What if something, let's say a plague, wiped out the USSR in 1955? Would neoliberalism have been able to get off the ground if its advocates couldn't take advantage of the fear of communism? Oh, gosh. Oh, man. I don't know. Like, I think the thing about the neoliberal turn is that it didn't really need, like, the thing is, by like the time neoliberalism actually became more of a thing in like the 70s and the 80s, Soviet Union actually wasn't very much of a threat to the United States anymore. By the 70s and 80s, the USSR was pretty weak. It was pretty like worn out. So it, like, a lot of the things that, like, a lot of the rise in neoliberalism is more of a reaction to the New Deal and New Deal type politics and like a great society type politics. And so I would argue that neoliberalism probably would have benefited, or neoliberalism probably would have still become a thing, even if the turbo flu wiped out the USSR in 1955. God, Matt Bors is so good. Man, I'm just looking at some of the other Matt Bors comics. Okay. That was the end of my questions. Does anyone have any other questions? I'm just looking in the chat now. So you guys have been like fighting for the entire stream. I'm wondering if anyone's even listening anymore, because they're all just like talking about whether America good or America bad. And I'm typing. So, yeah. Have you read The Sorcerer's Apprentice? No. Is the closest thing I've seen with a title like that isn't there the segment of Fantasia with Mickey Mouse and all of the reanimated or all of the animated brooms? Wasn't that called The Magician's Apprentice or something like that? Or The Sorcerer's Apprentice? Is it anything like that? Because that Fantasia bit is great, and Fantasia is beautiful. I love Fantasia, and that thing and that segment is my favorite part of Fantasia. So, what do you think about the monarchy in Canada? It's a dumb pastime. I think that we could probably get rid of it, but I'm honestly like not in a rush to get rid of it. I don't think it's a huge deal. It doesn't really play that big a role in Canadian politics, so it doesn't really matter to me. Opinion of Red Dead Redemption 1. Never played it. Red Dead Redemption hasn't come out on the PC yet, so I haven't played any of them. Have you seen the EJ and Destiny stream? I have not. No, I have not. I don't think that like those like debate me brah type debates really push conversations forward all that much. I feel like if I went on Destiny's stream, I would take a very different approach than a lot of people have. But that's my position. Do you have a video on the Balkans? No, I do not. I have actively avoided the Balkans. I've avoided the Balkans for the purposes of because the histories written there are rather sparse in English, and there are strong, almost psychotically obsessed people in the Balkans about their history. And so I know that if I make even the slightest mistake, then I would just be like, I would get so many death threats, and I just don't want to bother. I just don't like, I feel like I'd be wading into something that there's not a ton of good information in English about. And if I made any sort of mistake based on those things, that I'd probably get killed. Okay, you said I said my plan to industrialize the Roman Empire and turn it communist would kill a lot of people. Why? Is there not a way to do what Stalin tried to do without killing a million peasants? I think that rapid industrialization, industrialization involves changing so many of the fundamental aspects of the way that the economy functions that cause interruptions and learning curves and things like that. That if you were to they cause deaths and they cause these things over some period of time, and for the economy to transition from pre-industrial economy to an industrial economy in a very short amount of time will almost definitely involve massive disruptions in farming cycles and massive disruption in who gets resources and how things get to things and all those, and resources and shortages and all those kinds of things that lead to lots of death. The worst atrocities of communist countries came from their attempts to rapidly industrialize the country in a way that ended up being brutal and destructive, such as the Holodomor and like the Great Leap Forward and such. Opinion of Slovenia? Don't really have much opinion on Slovenia. I'm sure it's wonderful. What do you think about Ted Lieu? I don't know much about him. I'm not American, but he seems cool based on what I've seen. I have never heard of Ted Lieu, so... The YouTube Dumpster Flower based his video on the dark side of liberalism on the book The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Have you seen that video series? Everyone should. DF is an anarchist. Okay, this is the first I've ever heard of it, so maybe in the future. What's your opinion on why Golden Age pirates became so popular? Golden Age pirates. Well, if there's money to be made on the high seas, there's gonna be pirates, and a lot of the times pirates represent opportunities for advancement that were not available in the extremely stratified societies people lived in. Please do a video about Malta. Maybe. I got a lot of countries to do. Did Stalin intentionally to starve Ukraine? I don't have an answer to that yet. I'm supposed to be making a video on the Holodomor at some point in my career, so I will probably find an answer to that, but I don't have one right now. I got a lot more books to read, and I'm going to talk with Dr. Donnie Gluckstein again about that. Okay. We have any more stuff? Suppose a plague wiped... You really like plagues that wipe out entire continents. Suppose a plague wiped out Europeans in 1103 and discovering America was left to either Muslims or China. Do you think either would have been interested in colonizing it like white people were? Not in the way that white people were. Maybe Muslims might do it in a similar fashion. There's a bit more of a proselytizing energy in Islam than there is in a lot of the various spiritualities of the Chinese. But I don't think it's as strong as it is in Christianity. So I would imagine that you'd probably see like the Ottoman Empire expanding into the New World, which very much was like my first playthrough of Europa Universalis 4. So there you go. Last time I asked you, you didn't know about Greta Thunberg. She's a teenage Swedish environmentalist activist that's really famous. Yes, I actually have heard of her now. She did the protests of the to protest climate change every single Friday, run by students, and now it has become like a major movement. And she's like talked to the United Nations and stuff. Yeah, she's actually pretty cool. And I've heard that she's like she's on the autism spectrum and stuff like that, which is also pretty cool. Should we deprivatize and nationalize every industry? Yes. No exception. China bad isn't a very good reason to support U.S. imperialism. Yup. That's pretty true. Okay. Do we have any more questions? Do you believe the Democrats' whole right wing is bad if you do my wrong? Okay. Suppose a plague wiped out. Suppose another one of 255's turbo plagues wiped out the old world in 1444, with the Native Americans eventually recolonized the old world. Oh yeah. What's it called? In like the 15th century, by the time the 15th century was happening, indigenous people who lived in places like Alaska and in like Greenland and stuff like that were regularly following ice flows to Europe. So I think that it would have been just a matter of time before people were going and finding this huge empty continent and moving into it for sure. Do you believe the whole right wing is bad? Yes. It's what's it called? Right wing politics is based on the politics of fear, hatred, and the appropriation of the wealth of the masses in order to concentrate it in the hands of the few. Usually using some sort of excuse about racial supremacy, racial hierarchy, gender hierarchy, or colonization. And I don't like any of those things. Now, Nationalist Patriot, you actually did say that's the smartest thing you've said all stream, which is America bad is no reason to not criticize various wrongs in other countries around the world. This is true. You should send that to Glenn Greenwald, because Glenn Greenwald needs to learn that, because his sycophantic refusal to criticize the Russian Empire is bad. How would you respond to saying U.S. imperialism doesn't exist, political correctness does? That's not true. Okay. No, it's not. Communism is bad and the left is bad. Socialism is bad. Okay, cool. You provided no reasons why you believe that, but sure. Okay. You're just being a troll. U.S. imperialism does the amount of the U.S. is literally the U.S. literally has military bases in hundreds of countries, and political correctness seems to be more of a thing where people don't say that the president is a racist because they don't want to anger the conservatives. Political correctness does exist. Political correctness is like when a movie gets canceled because they didn't want to upset conservatives. I think that political correctness shows up when there's no facts to back up why somebody is right, but you're just doing something to make sure that a political faction doesn't get angry. That is pretty much exclusively a thing that centrists do to appease the right. So there's that. What if a plague wiped out the bourgeoisie? Nothing of value would be lost. I would love to see like this like plague that only affects people who are wealthy. I don't know how that would work. Did Trump start a new war yet? He tried, but no. He's been trying to go to war with Iran, but that has not come close. Come close. Terrifying stuff. All right. Do we have any more questions? I'm like following the chat very closely now. Maybe it's time to shut down. What do you think of the Yellow Vest movement in France? As far as I can tell, it's good. That's all I know. I hope that it's not the xenophobic, racist movement that it is in Canada, that it has turned into in Canada. That would make me sad. Socialism's end goal is communism. Communism is bad, therefore socialism is bad. Communism and socialist countries have killed me. This is like the dumbest. Okay, I'm kicking you out. This is like, you're just being a troll. Fuck off. Okay, going back to that Native American thing. Do you think that the Native Americans would have been able to industrialize on their own if they did not have the resources for that? Probably. If I remember, there were some people who thought that a lot of Mesoamericans were pretty close to industrializing in their own way. So I think that it would be perfectly possible. You read something about unidentified bodies in a boat being found in Northern Europe in the 1300s. Something they were Native Americans. Yes, Luke Lee, I actually made a video about that. If you look at my video, I did a video called Who Discovered America, which was about all the theories about people who discovered America before Columbus. And one of the videos is about Native Americans who discovered the Old World before vice versa. GBH, what do you think of autism? It's a spectrum. Autism spectrum disorder is a type of neurodiversity that makes social social interaction more difficult. Which sounds like a very hard way to live. But people have rich and fulfilling lives with autism spectrum disorder. It doesn't hold them back. A lot of people who have ASD end up doing amazing things. Their neurodivergence actually sometimes can help with like a lot of people with autism spectrum disorder end up becoming savants, and their ability to focus on specific things can actually be very helpful. So, it is a part of the tapestry of the human experience. How can we as citizens and users of platform use our voices to enact change? Speak out against the injustices of the world. Make good and fun, engaging content that is not reactionary and evil. And, try to make something beautiful. Is it better to ban trolls on the internet or ignore them? It really depends. Depends upon whether you can get anywhere with them. Some people, I am under the impression that Nationalist Patriot's not a troll because he seems to be engaging in good faith, although he gets grumpy, while that person was just being a troll. So most of the time, trolls are not worth engaging with. I thought the Mesoamericans were barely using metal in 1491. This is true, but there was, I don't remember, this is a very vague memory, at the edge of my mind, so you'd have to talk about it. Would nationalization eventually lead to corruption? Well, if you just put, nationalization, hopefully as part of nationalization, you would put that industry in the hands of the people who work in it, and so that would hopefully not be corrupt. Isn't capitalism and politics bad because capitalism and politics lead to corruption? Do you agree? I just mean you got to get rid of the capitalism part of it. That's why nationalizing every single industry would be a quick way to kill kill capitalism. Is money a plague? Yes. Omari. What did you say, Omari? You can't handle different opinions than yours. Grow up and don't whine and cry. Don't be such a bully. Okay. Sure, Omari. Good point. I'm not the bad. You're bad. Did you hear they took Asperger's out of the DSM-5 because the guy who discovered it worked for the Nazis? All right, I did not know that. Wouldn't surprise me because Asperger's and also autism and I think a few other disorders are all kind of being now wrapped up under the general autism spectrum disorder too. So there's that part. Why are my questions being ignored? Did I do something wrong? Did you have questions? Where are the questions? I'm missing questions because I'm a dum-dum. Usually the president has a dog, the British cabinet has a chief mouse or a cat, and an animal to represent the... what animal represents the Canadian premier? I don't think we have anything like that, honestly. I'm only missing questions because I'm not very good at this right now. How do you as a Western person write about East Asian or Middle Eastern cultures without being Orientalist? Oh, that's a pretty good question. You need to... All right, I'll get these questions down. So the way to do that is to listen to people listen to the people who are contemporary and listen to the people speaking from that. A lot of Orientalist literature, which I'm sorry about the word, but it was considered a field in the 19th century, was about white people going to these countries and then giving their own impression and then sort of talking back. But you should definitely try to use as much of the you should use as much of it as possible. You know, you should use the what should I say? Brain is blanking. Where was I? Okay. Yeah. Completely lost track of what I was talking about. Now I feel terrible. Oh yeah, Orientalism. Honestly, listening to the voices of the people who are there and their self-concept is more or less the big thing is more or less the thing. You have to listen. And white people in the 19th century were not good at listening. And try to acknowledge that you are, this is what's so great about postmodernism, is that you take a postmodern perspective on said thing and keep in mind that you are looking at the world through a white cisgendered male Western lens. And you have to realize that colors the way that you perceive the world. And you have to just be aware, is what I would say. Is neoliberalism dying? It's definitely having issues hanging on to power as this crisis of capitalism is getting more strong. Could you hold a discussion on your channel with people with different political opinions? That would be awesome. I have had several I've had several discussions on my channel with people with different political opinions. I had a stream just a couple weeks ago with Ina from the Polite Conversations podcast, and we had a very productive conversation about religion and the portrayal of and how to make positive and progressive change in religion. We had disagreements, but we did talk about them in a polite and good fashion. What I will not debate is I will not have discussions with people whose political opinion is that certain types of people are not fully people and that people do not deserve the basics of humanity because of one thing or another. I'm not going to have the debate on whether or not marginalized people are people. That's not a conversation I'm willing to have. I do think that a lot of the way that confrontational debate is written, is formatted today, like the way that Destiny does stuff, is counterproductive, or maybe not counterproductive, but just not productive in any fashion, and that we should have conversations that are more stuff. Is the poem Kubla Khan Orientalist? I have zero clue. I have not read it. Okay. I have not heard about the executive order to censor platforms online. Sorry about that. Okay. Oh, gosh. Now we're running out of time. Okay. Could you hold... I did that already. Do some people have read Silberman's Neurotribes? I have not. Should we bring back the word jingoism? Yeah. People who want war and empire, that's a thing to discuss. Would you put the odds of Trump being removed in 2020 at more or less than 50-50? I think it's more than 50-50 at this point. I think that there's a lot of candidates that would probably win the presidency. Opinion on the GTA games? I haven't played a GTA game since I was in high school, so I don't know. The last console I have owned that can play a Grand Theft Auto game was a PlayStation 2. And I haven't played any games since. I think the last GTA game I played was Vice City. So I remember liking that. Didn't Asperger's syndrome just come out of the autism spectrum disorder, seeing how Asperger's is a form of autism? Yeah, I think so. I think that Asperger's syndrome is just not, like, I don't know if it had anything to do with Asperger himself, but it got removed because now ASD kind of covers the whole spectrum. And I think that this is kind of like that time when Pluto got decategorized. Okay. Should Richard Wolff go on Joe Rogan? Oh man, I think that'd be really fun. Richard Wolff is a really, really good person for explaining the principles of Marxism for a layperson, because he's been teaching it in college for so long. So he'd be great. Okay. If she's a candidate, does Warren have a good chance of beating Trump? Yeah, I do think so. I think that a lot of candidates, even candidates I'm not a big fan of, probably have a good chance of beating Trump. Aren't you afraid of being stuck in an echo chamber? To an extent, I do think that it's hard to be in an echo chamber when you're an anarcho-communist. There's not that many people who agree with you, and the people who do, they're almost all of them. So in my mind, I don't think that there's very much there to say. In my mind, I don't really get into an echo chamber because of that. But Also, I do think that there are hard lines. Like, I don't like the whole accusation that we're all living in echo chambers is something interesting to discuss. I think it's very good. The problem in my mind is that where do you draw a line to the whole thing about like, let's have an open mind, but don't let your brain fall out. And it's like, just be like, it's not living in an echo chamber to think that that racism is bad. That is not a thing that we should be opening up for debate again. It's just, we decided that racism is bad. So there's that. But yeah, like, I don't know, like, there's no news sources that have the same political agreement as me. There's very few YouTubers, and there's very few, like, the media has so many, every single person I meet in my day-to-day life, with the exception of Thought Slime, are liberals to social democrats to democratic socialists. Some even call themselves conservatives, but I would argue that they don't really act like it. But, you know. So I feel like I don't live in a filter bubble. I don't feel like I surround myself with people who just agree with me, because there aren't that many of them. What's your opinion of classical liberals? If you're talking about neoclassical liberals, or just classical liberals from like the Paleo Age. If you're talking about people like Jordan Peterson and people like Sargon of Akkad's a neo-Nazi. He might call himself a classical liberal to cover up the fact that he believes in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, and actively, like, I don't know, like, I've never seen, I don't know, every time somebody calls themselves a classical liberal, it just seems that they're like part of the far right and they don't want to admit it. And so I don't bother with, I think that most of the time people who call themselves classical liberals are trying to or don't know that they're part of the far right, but they seem to be. Is it ever okay to sexually objectify people for your own pleasure rather than crude profit? I don't think that turning anybody into a sexual object is a nice thing to do. No. Okay. I think this might be my last question. Why do so many people sign on to free aliens in Area 51, but no one's signing up to stop Trump's concentration camps? I think that the freeing aliens thing in Area 51 is a joke, and people are doing it because it's a meme. While the Trump concentration camp is a real politics thing that isn't a fun, goofy thing to do. And I think that lots of people like signing up for goofy stuff, goofy memes, than like, something that has a real consequence, which is sad. It's not the way things should be, but it is the way things are. Okay. That was certainly a lot of things that were said. I think that was more than 30 to 50 feral questions, that's for sure. It's going to end the stream soon. So you guys have been amazing. I'll be streaming again tomorrow night, so if you want to pick up, or if there's a question I didn't get to, you can hang on to that until I until tomorrow night. Besides that, everybody, love yourselves, love each other, be good, and racism is bad, and don't commit genocide.